Brazil election goes to second round after Bolsonaro closes gap on Lula. Fractious political campaign to continue after closer than expected presidential ballot. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro will face off against Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the left-wing former leader, in a runoff vote at the end of this month, after neither man gained a winning margin in a closer-than-expected presidential election. Lula claimed more than 47% of valid ballots, failing to pass the 50% threshold to claim victory in the first round. Bolsonaro secured more than 43% of the vote, underscoring the resilience of his conservative political movement and confounding pollsters. A second vote will take place on October 30. Ahead of Sunday's election, the vast majority of opinion polls forecast that the far-right populist would on average claim only about 36% of the ballots. Some predicted Lula would win outright. Bolsonaro regularly calls the polls worthless and says he trusts in worthless in a nod to his large, raucous campaign rallies. The remaining handful of candidates, including left-wing Ciro Gomes and centrist Simone Tebet, who both scored in low single digits, have been eliminated from the race. The result leaves Brazilians facing almost another month of campaigning, with both candidates likely to increase their attacks. Pollsters' models showed Lula winning the runoff race by as many as 15 percentage points, although many will question these predictions after the unexpected closeness of the race on Sunday. The runoff is going to be very tight. The right is doing better than expected, especially in São Paulo, said Eduardo Melo, a political scientist at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Lula will need to win more votes from the center. He will have to overcome his high rejection rate and show himself to be a statesman and a moderate. Bolsonaro will now focus on attacks. He will focus on anti-Lula sentiment and the sentiment against Lula's Workers' Party and its history of corruption, said Mario Marcanini, managing director at Teneo. Lula will continue with his policy of building alliances and showing he is leading a pro-democracy movement. Slowly but surely then he might say what he is going to do in government more specifically. The two men dominated the campaign, which was at times marred by political violence, including the murder of 3 supporters of the Workers' Party and 1 backer of Bolsonaro. Despite voters pointing to the economy as their key concern going into the election, neither candidate has offered a coherent agenda of how to increase growth. The campaign was notably short on policy proposals but heavy on vitriol and insults. Lula, a former trade unionist who rose to the presidency and served 2 terms between 2003 and 2010, has focused on the nation's high levels of poverty and hunger. He says estimates that 30 million Brazilians suffered from a lack of food were unacceptable. Bolsonaro led a campaign focused on conservative values, which emphasized the importance of God, family and patriotism. Before Bolsonaro, Brazil's left was clearly hegemonic and their competitors were either centrists or non-ideological parties. Now the ideological right is clearly here to stay, said Melo. In the run-up to the election, the right-wing populist persistently claimed that Brazil's electronic ballot machines were vulnerable to fraud, leading opponents to fear he was preparing a justification to reject the result. After voting on Sunday, the president again hinted at this, saying, "I am sure that in a clean election, we will win with at least 60% of the vote." There are concerns that the polarized political climate could worsen as the second decisive round approaches. We can expect a dispute, a lot of tension and the possibility of Bolsonaro questioning the result of the polls in the second round will always be present, not least because it will just be him against Lula, said Carlos Melo, a political scientist at INSPER.